Here you go.
Hello, everyone. This is the CloudEight session. So today we're going to be talking about taking Microsoft Voice to the next level. Um, my name is Jason Wynn. I'm a Microsoft MVP specializing in Teams. I've been doing it now for many, many years. Kind of kicked off my career in before I even finished high school and secondary school in the United States. I worked doing some assistance with my father, helped do a lot of development and proofread lots and lots of Office books at the time, obviously well before Office 365 ever came along. By the time I finished with school, I went and did lots of work all throughout the United States, worked predominantly within the kind of the Southwest region of the United States down in Dallas. Was originally from Chicago, moved over to the UK back in 2002. Been doing it now. Again, voice and video collaborations really since kind of 2007. Did one of the very, very first office communications gigs within that, moving things up into a place to be able to get all of the things from like Nortel into OCS and got Avaya and all sorts, and then kind of did all those type of things. Got headed hunted and did work with Vodafone and with BT and all sorts. So I've been doing it for quite some time. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that whilst I was working in the United States, I used to run a movie theater whilst I was doing all my accreditations and my degrees and such. And one day when I was running a movie theater, I met Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford spoke to him at a movie theater and ran him around the what's called the projection booth. And then about 2 years later, he came up to me. He said, "Hey, aren't you that guy from Dallas?" So it's quite fun for me to be able to be remembered and looked into that being sought out. And then in my spare time, I run the Microsoft Cloud User Group, run the Evolve Conference, and I also run a quite successful blog and podcast called All About 365 Podcast with Steve Goodman and myself. So in this session, we're going to be talking about all these things on agenda items. Within that, we'll be going over kind of a quick overview of Teams, really, really brief, because hopefully you guys already have a good understanding of what Teams is. Go over voice, what it was, what it is today, what's Teams callings, plans, operator connect, direct routes, calling, new calling features, and such. I'll go through all these things. And by all means, if you have any questions, go ahead and come off of mute if you can, and then come into the call. Otherwise, we'll be going through and just making sure we'll see how we're playing out. But by all means, just come in and just join in the conversation. Don't feel afraid. And then I'll try to keep my head up above, see what's going on as well. So if you have any questions, let me know, and then we'll go through and answer any questions. And I'll keep my eye on the chat as much as I can. So what is Teams? So Teams is ultimately a kind of four things. It allows you to communicate, collaborate, customize and extend, and work within confidence. So we'll go through each kind of facet in its own. So obviously we can chat, we can do meetings, we make calls. There's the base level. Within that, we can collaborate, have a single pane of glass that allows us to collaborate. So whether it's Excel files or whatever else we're trying to work within. And then obviously within it as well, we can go and pull all this information in and tie it all together. So that way it allows us to work as a unit, as like a single registry of what the truth is. We can extend that off so that way we have the ability to customize our own applications, or you pull upon Microsoft's own store and app store within Microsoft Teams. And within that as well, we can use the Teams admin center to be able to pull it through. So why is this irrelevant and what's going on with it is it brings everything into a single pane of glass. And that's the really key thing is we're bringing everything into the Microsoft 365 position, whether it's Exchange or within SharePoint or within OneDrive. It brings it into a single availability screen. And like we're going to build off of those things. So what's new, what's different is that we all use the same components within it. So whether we're using a Windows 7 or Windows 10 device, or whether you're working on a mobile, whether it's Android or iPad or whichever device we're using, or if we're using a web-based client, either Edge or Chrome, we can all use those things. Now, some really key functionality that we need to call out here is that all these clients are using about 98% of the same code. So the code that we have on the iOS is ultimately the same thing we're going to see on OS X, or we're going to see on Chrome, Edge, or Windows 10. The desktop client's the same as the mobile. up to 98% of it's going to be exactly the same. But really, what we're here for is to understand what it is we got with voice. So historically, voice was brought to everybody by using these old telephone systems. And I'm long enough now to see all sorts of things. And one of the things that we've seen before is that I've seen these telephone systems installed in ladies' toilets. I've seen them installed in bank vaults. I've seen them everywhere. And they're not just home, just in data centers. And that gave us the ability to have a handset, but the handset needed to be wired in. That was ultimately attached to some sort of patch paneling, and that gave us base telephone, this PSTN telephone. That literally allowed us to make and receive telephone calls. But in addition to that, that wants to build out. So we have the service provider and dialing, conferencing, web-based meeting space, instant messaging, support, availability, voicemail, and contact center. And we want to be able to have it backed by a financially backed SLA, a service level agreement. And we want it to be 5 nines, 4 nines, 3 nines. And we want it to be able to be provided by Microsoft to be able to have that one place to be able to do it. So taking that onto it, what do we get? And what's the key components of this? And what we really see is that calls are being made to and from teams. And by us supplying that license functionality within it, allows us to make and receive phone calls. So once we apply that license, the client actually transforms to allow us to have that keypad functionality, whether it's on iOS or Android or on your Windows client, whether it's web-based or desktop or full-fat client. So we take it in. So what do we actually need to make those calling? So we need to have the base level functionality within Microsoft. So whether that's an E3 license or E5 or E1 or business voice licensing, we can tie all these things in. So what we find out is that we have Office 365. We tie in the Microsoft Teams license within it. And if we're on an E3 or E1, we need to buy the phone system license. If we have an E5, comes included. Now we take this another step and we tie things into it to allow us to have the calling plans or the direct route functionality. So those two things ultimately gives us the ability to have those telephone calls in and out. But Microsoft has taken this even further the last few months, and we're starting to see something come into it. Besides just calling plans and direct routes, it's something called Operator Connect. So going forward, we're going to have the ability to make calls either through calling plans, an Operator Connect, or a direct route. So let's touch on the first ones first, calling plans. So what are calling plans? Calling plans are basically a Microsoft managed, simple and easily maintained. They allow us to have domestic and international calling, and then ultimately Microsoft are continuously spinning up different areas and markets and where different geographies in which we can supply this to. But what do we need to get a calling plan working? And what type of functionality do we need to get out of that too? So ultimately, like I said, we have the E1, E3 plans in which we bolt on 2 licenses to ultimately take it to the same level that we have at E5. And that's the phone system license and the PSTN conferencing license. And within those, we then go and we add in a calling plan. So that's either a domestic and international calling plan. And that ties it into what we're going to be able to have the actual connection through and to. So this actually gives us the lines and minutes to be able to make and receive those phone calls. So whether they are a small, a medium, or large, whether we want them to be able to make international phone calls, or if we want to be able to use something consumption billing, it's all totally different. So what we can do is we can apply a domestic license, and that'll give us local numbers to whichever geography you apply that license to. Now, a key note here is that these licenses are pooled across the entire pool of users within each geography. So if we have 10 people on 120 minutes in the United States, ultimately those 10 times 120 minutes are being pooled across all those users. So if one user is using a few minutes worth of calls and everybody else is using quite a lot, as long as it buffers out and remains quite even, then Microsoft will help take care of that and ultimately smooth those things over. Now, if you ever have an opportunity where you have domestic calls, but you only make a handful of international calls, it's worthwhile looking at consumption billing as well. So consumption billing gives us the functionality to make and receive phone calls internationally or to a premium rate number or whatever you would like. And ultimately what we do with those is we apply a small balance to that consumption billing license. So if we wanted to apply $100 to it, then what would happen is ultimately the organization would pull down against that $100, and then they would be applied to it. So that was kind of the native way we would do things, and very much the original way Microsoft would do it. So that's allowing Microsoft in each of the geographies they're available to make and receive phone calls into those geographies that Microsoft supply. It's very simple, very easy. It can Microsoft turnkey. But what's the new boy on the block? The new boy on the block is ultimately Operator Connect. So Operator Connect brings a kind of a new service that allows us to have operator managed services within it. So we still have PSTN calling via Teams, but it doesn't require any additional hardware. And what this allows us to do is take that functionality even further. So take a look at what Operator Connect looks like. It's ultimately a kind of an SBC as a service. It allows Microsoft to have the interconnect between the Teams itself within Azure and the SBCs being hosted by the third parties of these operators to be able to provide those PSTN functionality. So we would leverage the existing contracts that we already have. So if we already have a contract with one of the providers that we're going to speak about in a moment, we could utilize that. Likewise, it's quick and simple to deploy. It takes minutes. Now, obviously, we haven't been able to expedite this or try these things yet because it's brand new within Microsoft itself. The actual telephone services itself are being managed and maintained by the third parties. These operators be able to do it. So all SBCs are being managed and maintained by them. And likewise, Microsoft provide a level of support, enhanced support availability to them because Microsoft are creating a one-to-one peer network with them. So that way, as Microsoft disclosed, it has provided enhanced reliability. So who's on the first list? Who's made the cut? And ultimately, the first cut is going to be BT and T-Mobile, NTT, Intrado, and all these other organizations that we see within this. So these organizations you can go to and you can speak to them and then ultimately port your telephone numbers over and move them into Teams without much difficulty. At least that's the thought and that's the process. But again, we haven't yet had a look at how we actually manage and maintain that yet because it is brand new. Very, very likely to go be Q3 availability for most of these organizations within. So what do we need to do? How do we spin it up? So first thing we do is within the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, we go to Voice and we'll have an Operators tab. And if we see the operator that we already need or we want to be able to have, we can go ahead and select them. But what happens if we have a multi-geography or multi-geo environment that we don't yet know who we're going to be able to apply these things to? We can do a quick search. So in this case, we type in United, and we can see that we have UAE, UK, and United States. In this instance, we want to go to the United States. Now, again, across the top of it, we can also see that we're trying to apply calling and audio conferencing. So we choose this selection, choose that country, and that allows us to see what we've got. So within this, we can see that we wanted to have telephone numbers. Our example of opportunity or operator is going to be Contoso. We apply that. Now we need to make sure we have two boxes ticked. One is the operator can contact me and I accept the data transfer notice. Now what we're doing now within this is we're ingesting the telephone numbers into Microsoft Teams. And we're taking those services natively and Microsoft has opened up the APIs between the telephone providers and Microsoft to be able to ingest those telephone numbers natively within the Teams. We can then see these telephone numbers. We can see which providers we have. So if you can see in this, that we can see that the Contoso telecom service has been enabled up. It's still working through the acquired telephone numbers that come in. You can see who's done it, whether it's active or inactive, and what we're trying to do. Again, for the Teams Admin Center, we still use our phone numbers, and we can apply telephone numbers to it. So in this case, we just set up some dummy numbers, transferred over, implied that the 001 is going to Seattle, and 02 is going to Madrid, and 03 is going to Barcelona. We can see that they're user numbers and see that they're assigned to a user. So that is how we would do it if we had a very simple solution where we were already using these incumbent suppliers. So if we take a look at the list again, if we're on any of these suppliers as already, and we want to move natively within Teams, we could go to them and then apply that through. But what happens if I haven't got those services? What happens if I haven't got, my service provider isn't on that list? In that case, we would apply a direct route. So we look at the calling plans and where we have availability to, we can see that we hit everything within that left-hand side. So it's growing and it's growing every single year. And what we're trying to do now is take it even further. So with direct routes, we can now hit all countries within it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is always smooth sailing. What often happens is there's different things that we overlook. So as part of this, why would we go to a direct route? If there's a technical reason, so in case we need to provide services that are outside of Microsoft Teams calling, then we would go the direct route. If we have a business objective, so it's cheaper for me to have telephone numbers and calling services from somebody other than Microsoft. If I could buy my lines and minutes much cheaper than from my incumbent supplier than I could with Microsoft, but I still want to use Teams as my calling services, we can do that through a direct route. So what happens, and how do we think so? Things that we often miss as part of kind of bringing your own SBC into Microsoft is that we need to have a public IP address. We need to make sure that the FQDN of that SBC is also published. We've got a DNS record for it. We need a public certificate. So, but why do we need a public certificate? So Microsoft encrypt all the media that's going between the client and the SBC itself. So regardless of man in the middle attacks or anything like that, we need to make sure that that certificate is validated, is available. Likewise, we can apply all those things through and then make sure all that's being encrypted between the endpoints and the SBC, and that allows us to have that full functionality between the two. But which services and which providers are securely certified? Right now, we can go to audio codes, Ribbon, ThinkTel, Oracle, AnyNode, and Metaswitch. Likewise, you can go to that URL, see if the which latest information is available. So that's one of the ways we can do it. We can bring our own SBC. But who else can we use? What other ways we can do it? And so kind of in between solution is what we would do. So where we saw the operator connect a minute ago, we could also do something called direct route as a service. So in this case, I can go to one of my providers and then go and utilize my own SIP trunk from that. Or I can go to them and have them establish a direct route into my Microsoft Teams environment. I create the linkage between the two, and then I could go ahead and bring everything together within that and still have my connectivity. So I'm using my incumbent supplier, I'm using their service, but they provide an SBC for me, so a border controller, and that allows me to have those connections through. But what happens? Where do I miss? What's the tricks? What things, the lessons have we learned over the years for this? And that's things like this where we can need to make sure that we add their domains into Office 365, but we need to override the validation steps. What else do we need to look at? We historically we've been able to do PowerShell and Skype through the Skype connector or through that connector. Nowadays we can use the GUI. And likewise, if we wanted to be able to still need to create the online PSTN usage and the voice routes, and still need to create those things as if we were doing it back on-prem like we would have done with Skype for Business once upon a time. So that takes us up to how we get connectivity from our voice services, whether they're incumbent or we're going to new, going to Microsoft, or using the Operator Connect. But what are some of the cool things that we're seeing coming out? So what we often have when we go in an organization is we have the ability to, very rarely our telephone solution is greenfield. So we may have a connectivity that have all sorts of functionality within it that we want to be able to have the ability to have our incumbent telephones. Well, that's cool. As long as those lists of incumbent telephone servers and services are being supplied by one of these, either Cisco or Poly or Yealink or audio codes, we can then go and hit those, we keep those devices. And what Microsoft's allowing doing is those devices to be registered. So you can register those things against Teams, bring that functionality into Teams, bring it all natively within it, and then have all that connectivity within your existing telephone without having to replace all your physical handsets, which is quite big, really. Likewise, you may have new telephones and new Teams handsets, but we ship out all these devices out to a customer or to an endpoint, but we still want to be able to have that functionality that we want within the Teams device, but we don't want them to log in every time. So now we can log in by a code. So we go to the URL, go to that device login, type in that URL, authenticate who we are, and from that we can get that functionality, and that device will be registered as me. Likewise, when we finish that telephone call, or we finish the services on that telephone, we sign out, and then that device becomes stateless. So it's no longer got my information on it, and it's ready to go. In addition, we can get new features such as group call pickup, call park, location-based routing. That spins up other things such as calls and answering hold, retrieve, call history, delegation, transfer, and all of this functionality that we see here allows us to be able to provide those services in. And very few opportunities now that I go to that we're not able to meet all the functionality that the incumbent telephone system has. It's only when we go into deeper things such as things around contact centers or call compliance recording that we need to think about pulling in a third party solution, whereupon we can't do natively within Microsoft Teams itself. But as and when people pull back into the office and come back into the office, we realize that sometimes there's things and functionality that we've forgotten. So we've just replaced all of the telephone system within an organization. And we're walking back into the office for a first time. And we realize that device that we had in the meeting rooms was tied to that old telephone system. And that takes us up to the next step is what do we do then? How does the functionality work? Where do we look at? What functionality are we going to get when we get back to the meeting room? So it's quite pertinent that we're ripping out an old telephone system and we're going into a new. And so, yes, we have all the desk phones and the handsets and the headsets that we were looking at before, and those are still really relevant to how we get that last value or the last mile. But when we go into the meeting room space, we realize that those functionality that we once had is not there. And the evolution of the meeting room has changed drastically since COVID and since the global pandemics. So nowadays we're able to meet anywhere. By that, I can work from home. I can work from virtually from any location. I could be a hybrid user working from part in the office to part from home. I can tie all these things in together. Likewise, I can work as part of a large group, or I can work on my own. I can make and receive my own telephone calls. Work regardless of where I'm physically, no matter where I'm at. I can spin up a meeting in a moment's notice. So some of the intelligence side of things is really clever. So as and when we go into meeting rooms, we have something called that contextualizes our conversations within the meeting. So I can have use some of the new intelligent devices and intelligent speakers allow me to have multiple people registered or multiple people within a meeting room, and you can identify who I am by where the Microsoft microphone picks up who and where within the room, and it analyzes my voice versus the other people in the room and realizes that I may be participant one. Likewise, the other up to 9 other people within the meeting room also have that functionality. So what we could do then is have that functionality all natively within Microsoft Teams and have all that information intelligence built out to be actually have the transcoding of everything and all those services within it be able to apply through. Likewise, we also have the ability to do people-to-peer video sharing and leverages all the AI and assistance. Likewise, we now have the ability to use Cortana to join meetings. So we can walk into a meeting room and ask the device to join the meeting room and join the meeting itself, and they'll automatically join it and they'll add the information in. And it works the same whether I'm on my device, whether I'm on my, again, we're trying to touch on what and where, so we can see where we build that out. So it doesn't matter if I'm on a Wi-Fi network or a landline, or if I'm working natively from a cellular network or mobile network. Again, I can join these meetings from anywhere. So I could be on an MTR, a Microsoft Teams room, a desktop, a mobile. And this ties into that second or third slide I had is that it doesn't really matter where you're calling from because 98% of the same code on all those devices. Likewise, I can use that same functionality within that Microsoft Teams room to have that functionality in. So I can now start controlling my MTR, my meetings through a mobile device. I could do annotations and markups and everything that I have within it as well, and be able to provide all those services through. It kind of gives a more full feature rich environment to be able to look at and be able to deal with, be able to have that control. Likewise, audio conferencing has grown drastically since beginning, particularly since COVID and lockdown, and be able to work internationally from our organizations. We can now use 400 different cities within a all as a PSTN conferencing point. Likewise, I can do dial out to over 190 countries. So I may be as part of a Microsoft Teams meeting, but I want to be able to call or drag people in within my meetings You can now do that. And I can do it quite easily. It's easy as type it in the telephone number. I'll be able to pull them in. And we would only ever do that is if we needed to be able to do it if they weren't on Teams already. But what if we want to take things even further and we want to be able to get all these things into it? So I want to be able to have all my existing information or hardware that I have with that certified by Skype for Business. Now, the good news is all those things will continue to work with Microsoft Teams. Like it says, millions of devices were shipped each year, and we have a large plethora of devices that have been certified by Skype for Business. Those will continue to work for Teams. Nowadays, all the new Teams devices are moving closer and closer with the integration in. Now the ability to press a button and launch the Teams client. Likewise, we may have integration in and further optimization skills within Microsoft Teams Voice. But which devices are certified and how do we find that out? So that key URL is right there, the office.com/Teams devices allows us to have that functionality. So we can go there, find out what's the right device for the right space room. So we can also find out which device is right for me. So I may need to require active noise cancellation, or I may have a requirement with wired versus wireless, or binaural versus monaural. And I can check all those devices and what the rough price points are and where I can buy them from whichever geography I'm at. Now that allows me to have that connectivity natively within Microsoft Teams to be able to do so. So, but which devices are certified? What's the right thing to use? So again, Microsoft tries to make this simple. So we have personal devices such as headsets, desk phones, mobile phone station. Now, mobile phone station allows you to dock a mobile handset, to utilize it as a charging station for it, but it also allows you to have the Teams client installed on your mobile phone, and you use your mobile phone as the means to make and receive your telephone calls. That's quite good for areas where you're trying to reduce the overall impact and connectivity to people that have obviously you don't want touch points to be really, really high. You want to be quite narrow if you could. So mobile phone stations are quite a good place to do that. Again, you have speaker pucks, which allow you to transfer those calls, take them with you, be able to make and receive calls from them, an additional audio accessory, mobile phones themselves. And then you get to shared locations such as a conference phone or conference room phones such as Star phones, such as Poly or Yay devices, Crestron devices. The extended Microsoft Teams rooms, which such as Yay Crestron, Poly, Logitech. They all allow you to have what's called Microsoft Teams room device, and we'll touch on those in a moment. And then to be able to extend that off into such things as interactive whiteboards that give you the ability to have that functionality, the whiteboard back, tie into things like Office, OneNote, and be able to provide your whiteboarding back into those rooms. And all these things are really, really relevant to be able to do so. But one of the things that we realized when we started to do this more and more and more, or particularly as people are coming back into the office, is that people are still using meeting rooms like very, very heavily. And we realize that what happens is often when people go book a room, they realize that the existing room may be overrun, or people have stayed in the room, and what do we do? So in this case, we have something called Microsoft Teams panels. Right now, they're available from Condeco and through Yaylink. Allows us to see what's going on in the room, whether it's available or free. We can go book it on the fly for an ad hoc meeting. And when we create an ad hoc meeting, it sends the invites out for that. So it quickly sends it out to whomever is available to book it. Likewise, we wanted to walk up to a meeting room and use it, but we realized that the actual meeting room is already occupied. And we can then go and find out which room is available to it, what's the nearest room to us to be able to use. We can load up some blueprints or some information around that, find out which rooms are available for us to be able to jump into that meet our requirements for the correct size. We can go and book that room from that panel, be able to go to it and walk in and join that meeting from that panel. So that's huge for us. Likewise, we can also do things around social distancing. So we can have it alert people as and when that panel becomes the meeting reaches max throughput that we can have available to it. We can have notifications in that saying, do not join this meeting, or please do not enter this meeting room because we've hit the maximum amount we can have that's still socially distanced. But how do we take that even further with things then? And the easiest way is we take that further within Microsoft Teams Rooms. So Teams Rooms is the native way of joining either a telephone call, or if we want to be able to join a video conferencing solution. And if we're talking a video, and we're talking how we're going to taking the voice to the next level, you have to introduce what we're going to be doing with MTRs. So MTRs transfer the room regardless of whatever the physical size. So it doesn't matter if it's a small, a medium, or a large, or a huddle space. They're quite easy to deploy. Some providers are more easy and more simple than others. And then obviously within that, it connects the hardware and the software side together to be able to create a joined up experience. So this would be when you don't want to install something as simple as I've seen a lot of organizations go and invest in a desktop, invest in the webcam, invest in the speaker, and realize that nobody uses it because it's complex. Or they go into it and it's not easy to join. The functionality you get out of an MTR for the price point, for me, is it's a no-brainer to just install MTRs within the environment. And it's quite easy for us to be able to get set up. And I've written some articles about how easy or difficult it is to configure these things ahead of time. So Microsoft are installing a new way of doing these things. And those of you who may be aware of like Meraki systems, where once upon a time you could go and pre-configure them or configure the configuration, input that just device installation ID into it, and then when you install it in, it'll be configured with the right user profile, the right configuration, any sort of policy information, and it all comes from there as well. So Microsoft are putting a lot of thought into how do we make these things easily deploy and what's the right device for the right size room. Again, if we go back to that slide where offices.com/Teams devices, it pulls it all together within that. So what are we seeing new? The Microsoft Teams room with touching displays allows us to take a standard MTR and then utilize a Microsoft Teams touch display or Windows touch display, ultimately have a USB back to it. And that gives us the functionality to see what's going on and allows us to communicate and collaborate. Now, we want to be able to ultimately have two screens within this because we want one to be a whiteboard and we want one to be the video endpoint. But allows us to have that functionality in. But Teams Rooms kind of pulls it all together as the main unit to handle all that information. What happens if I don't have a smart whiteboard, or I don't have the touch displays, but I still have an analog display or like an analog whiteboard? Then Microsoft will cater for this as well. So what we use is something called a content camera. The content cameras ultimately point back at the meeting room and back into the space itself. It allows us to project against a traditional whiteboard. And what happens is, as I project against the whiteboard, Microsoft take an analytics around it, and it has to have either silver or a black background, a border to the actual whiteboard. And Microsoft will truncate that and then keystone it as well, so they make it into right angles for that room. So what happens then is it allows me to see the whiteboard that we actually have. Now, those of you who are quite clever in the room will realize that if I'm shooting a projector or recording content from a camera and I'm walking in front of it, I'm not going to be able to see what's going on. Well, Microsoft took this into consideration too. So what we could do now is be able to have intelligent rooms with content capture and be able to project onto whoever's displaying it. So if we take a look at this, we see that both the whiteboard and the person can both be seen at the same time. So we see what content's being done. And so as the presenter moves out of the way and the content camera can capture it, and then that information is overlaid over the back of the person. So you're never out of touch with what's going on. And likewise, we talk about all the analytics, what's going on with meetings and all those things going forward as well. We're going to take all that content and ingest it in, and then at the end of the meeting, we'll have a copy of that whiteboard. Will be the content of the entire video of the meeting, will the content of all the information that was ever spoken during that meeting, and I have it all in a single location. So if we wanted to have analytics around whether or not Jason Wynn spoke about Project Alpha, we could pull that in. We could also see whether or not Jason's written about it because we have a copy of the slides of what's happened on that what's been projected up on the whiteboard, and what's been pulled on in content as well. So that for me is really, really big, particularly for organizations that have an existing meeting room, have existing whiteboards, have really work collaboratively and really, really kind of media or marketing, or want to be able to understand how things are going and pull it together. But I will still want to be able to have an interface into people who are working from home or working hybrid. So they may not be in the office to see. I can then pull all that into the same location to be able to see those things. Some of the really cool things that we're seeing come out again is the staying safe and the practicing social distancing. So in this instance, Microsoft have been working heavily to be able to count the people available. So as and when you create a meeting space within Exchange and within Microsoft Teams, it'll ask you how many people can sit in that room. And then Microsoft will analyze how many people are in and out of that room. So if it realizes that in a meeting room can only hold 5 people, but a sixth person has come in, you'll get that banner across the top, and it'll say the number of people currently in this room exceeds the recommended capacity. Microsoft's also trying to keep people safe, keep everybody safe within the organization to be able to do so. Another thing we're trying to do as well is keep the contact that we have with the physical devices to allow. So we can start using things like Room Remote. So Room Remote allows me to control everything within the Microsoft Teams room natively through my handset. So my mobile phone. My mobile phone becomes an extension of the MTR. So I can do closed caption, change the screen layout, be able to share information or content within it. It allows me to control the actual MTR so I don't have to worry about going in, physically touching anything. Likewise, we have the integration into Cortana services to be able to do so. But being able to tie all that information into a single location within that, to be able to tie it into our own mobile phone to give that additional functionality. We have the ability to do something called casting. So those of you who are running Windows or Android or iOS or Android, we now have the ability to use that. So if you look at my mobile phone, I have a cast button in the upper right-hand corner. It goes and uses Bluetooth to try to find out what the nearest meeting rooms are available to me. In this case, I clicked on Belper meeting room, and then it gives me a choice. I can either do my presentation from my actual handset of a PowerPoint, or I can project my screen. And I can control all that natively from my device, from my handset, my mobile phone, my cellular phone, and brings it all back into a central place for me able to do all these things. And again, I can join a meeting, present to it with a PowerPoint or my screen, share video content, collaborate against it. And again, I haven't physically touched anything in the room other than my handset. But I want to be able to still have that same location to be able to manage these things. And again, we can do these things. So if we look at how we do a device management side, we have to still have the Teams Admin Center. This gives us the ability to have all of it within a central location. So it doesn't matter if I buy Poly handsets and I'm using Jabra headsets, and then I want to be using the A-Link Microsoft Teams rooms. It all comes back to the central location. So if it's running a Windows IoT version of like a Microsoft Teams room, or if it's running an Android device, or I'm having like a handset, then those handsets and everything like that I'll be able to manage from the devices section. Likewise, I can have the single consistency of what's happening. I can apply profiles. I can do troubleshooting. I can find out whether or not these devices are running the latest firmware. I can start applying compliancy to it. So I can find out whether or not people should or shouldn't be making phone calls or where they're making phone calls to. I can apply policies to it. So if I wanted the executives meeting room to have a lockdown service, I don't want to have the meeting information up, I can apply a policy through this as well. So I can go and create a policy for the executive MTRs and lock down the meeting information. So that way it just shows Jason Wynn has a meeting, not Jason Wynn is buying a new organization or Jason Wynn's organization has redundancies pending. I can control what's going on with the devices all the way down to whether they're using HDMI ports or what speakers they're using, which camera they're using, whether or not things are physically connected or disconnected, as well as the policy configuration. Now, there's organizations out there that I just can't reach all of these things through, or I have an investment inside an older telephone system or a video conferencing solution, and I'm not yet ready to go and invest inside a Microsoft Teams room. In that case, we would use something like the Cloud Video Interop. So Cloud Video Interop allowed me to take a H323 connectivity and turn it into a SIP connecting room. So if I have a meeting room that's no longer being used for old H323, but I'm still keen to use it within Teams, I know the functionality to do that. So I can look into it. It's native Microsoft Teams and Exchange scheduling. So I can schedule meetings like I always have. But when I send an invite out to a meeting room that doesn't have Teams client on it, the Cloud Video Interop will add that meeting into the native H323 invite. And so that way people can still come up to it and join it natively as if it were a Teams device. Now we lose out on some of all that clever creativity that we have. So we can't cast the things. We don't have any of that functionality. This purely if I want to bring it in as a video device or audio device into a Microsoft Teams meeting. But that takes us all the way up to where we're kind of going at with this day and age. But we still have some things to think about. How do we actually do it? How do we get started? And what are kind of the first steps? So the first steps are always to start using Teams if you're not doing so already. And pick a project that you haven't done. So often what I find is people often develop, kind of deploy Teams using Teams, which is a really, really good way of doing it. And make sure we collaborate everybody on that one single project for now. Make sure you download the mobile client and use it. So you get support, use things like Fast Track and Success with Teams. And Success with Teams is kind of a really underutilized access point for Microsoft to be able to do so. And what Success with Teams allows us to do is find some of the scriptings that we use for Power BI. It also helps us with adoption. So thinking about the messages which we want to convey to people from around voice, video. So I may be able to tell people one of the things that I learned quite early on is make sure we get our message straight and right for those people. Now, everybody may have different people from different parts of the business will have different requirements, but we want to be able to impact them as a human being and not as an employee. So tell them how it's going to enrich their life. Tell them how it's going to make their life better. Tell them how it's going to save them X amount of hours per day, not that it runs at 4K or a 1080p or it uses HD audio, it's using a particular codec. They don't care about that. What people truly care about is how we convey that message to make their lives even better. How we're going to use Teams to make things simpler, how they're going to save X amount of hours per day by utilizing this product and show them how it's going to save them time and effort to be able to do it. And then on top of that, how do we take this to the next level? Provide feedback. So give me feedback directly about the product, or give product directly back. Give information about the product directly back. So submit your information, submit your feedback through those things, and obviously tie all those things all together. Now, if you have any questions, by all means, either raise them inside the chat or send me a tweet or however you would like to do it. Just come out and say hello, and then I'm happy to feel those things, and we got a few more minutes left. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.